So the panel tonight, led by Kathleen, is going to give you a lot of kind of real-life examples from people who've, kind of been on the entrepreneurial side and actually raised an A recently, so they can give you very, kind of specific examples. What I'm going to do is actually focus on the other side of it, the side that probably most people in the audience don't really get a sense of, and that's really what it's like behind the scenes, what it's like on our side. What we're seeing, how many companies we're seeing, what the process looks like internally, how many we actually do in a given year, just to give you some context. So I'm going to start off by kind of introducing us, telling you what, kind of from the initial email all the way through the end, what that looks like, almost in terms of numbers, and then also some kind of a bit on kind of how to think about preparing for a Series A, and then some common pitfalls that we'll see in the actual pitch. I think there's just a ton of resources out there on kind of very specific steps and how different people have done Series A, and I'll let the panel handle that, so I'm going to take a slightly different approach. But we'll have a lot of time at the end for Q&A. I'm happy to do that, and if there's something in which, kind of as I'm going that doesn't make sense, or have a question on, I'm happy to make this interactive. Okay. So again, this is me. I've been at kind of all those places. This isn't all that interesting, so we can skip. So a little bit about Greycroft. I'll speed through this, but just so that you have some context. So we've been in New York and Los Angeles, and we're actually the only fund in those two locations since 2006. We were started by Alan Patrick, who's been in the business about as long as there's been a VC business. We started off with a $75 million fund, and now we're at 175 and committed to staying under 200 for our early stage funds. And that's so that we can kind of continue to have the same strategy, which I'll get into in a second. We started off with a digital media focus, but that was in 2006 when that term had meaning. Now it means everything, so it's really kind of internet and mobile enabled. We have particular strengths in certain sectors, but really we'll take a broad view of it. We're much more focused on the stage. So that's kind of 90% of our time is going to be at Series A. We've got a small seed program, and now we also have a growth fund, which is managed separately and can kind of follow companies through the life cycle. And we're quite a bit flexible, which is going to be a little bit different than some of the other funds, especially larger funds, which sometimes will need things like 25% ownership and need to put a certain amount of dollars to work, which you'll start to hear when you start to go out to raise a Series A. We take a different approach. It's more, we don't have a minimum ownership percentage or a minimum investment amount. Anything from $500,000 to $5 million we consider a core investment. We also aren't expecting kind of an IPO. The vast majority of companies are actually bought in strategic sales, and the average price that venture-backed companies have been bought in strategic sales over the last 10 years is $120 million. So if you go into every company thinking that it's going to be $1 billion, you're going to be wrong a lot of the time. So we're actually not expecting that, and given the small funds that we have, we can still do very well with kind of average outcomes, which are actually very good outcomes. Okay. This is portfolio. We can keep going, and it's been a good run so far. Great. All right. So this is getting to kind of how this works on our end. So the vast majority of companies, of Series A's, of people like you that we're going to meet is going to come through introductions, and those are going to come through warm introductions. And what that means is that it's somebody that we know, and somebody who knows you who's introducing us. We get probably, it's more than 300 per month. 300 per month is just in New York, and we don't capture everything. So if I get something in through LinkedIn, that's not getting captured. But these are the things that are getting captured by our system. And you're seeing that from this year over last year, the number of things that we're seeing monthly has gone up by 50%. So just to give you a perspective of how much is actually going on in the market today. And so this is what happens on our side when we get a company. So you call it 300, and then you get an email in. And then, for about half of those, we'll schedule a first meeting or a call. And that is, so then at after a first meeting or a call, we'll typically then kind of have a conversation on a Monday, so that's going to be at least a week. So then we're going to have a conversation on a Monday amongst our whole team and talk about what the follow-up is, if there's follow-up, and if there is, then we'll schedule a next meeting. And typically that'll be kind of going and visiting your offices if our first meeting has actually been in ours. So that means 90% of companies that we get in any given month actually don't get past there. From there, we'll work it all the way down. A partner meeting there in the bottom, of which is probably 5 or 6, that's having the company in to pitch everyone on our team. For us, that means that's via video conference with our team in LA. Maybe it's in LA, maybe it's in New York, but you're pitching everyone. And then, kind of from there, we'll move to kind of hopefully close an investment. And an active fund, and particularly us anyway, we're on pace to close 1 core investment a month. So we'll do about 12 in a year. And here are just some kind of common reasons. Some of you may have heard these before, but this is kind of how we think about things. There are common reasons for kind of passing without a meeting. Will often be kind of not a stage fit, which I'll get into a little bit later, how we define that. Oftentimes it can be just not an area of interest or outside of sector focus. If I see something that's going to launch a satellite into space, that's just not something that we do. Biotech, not something that we do. It can also be a capital structure issue. If a company has raised $20 million and needs us to recap it, that's just not our business either. Common reasons for passing after 1 meeting are also varied, but these are kind of the most typical. We actually keep track of why we've passed and we bucket them, and so these are kind of the most typical. Oftentimes, from the investor or from the entrepreneur point of view, you're not necessarily going to hear you are the problem. As the CEO is coming in to pitch, that's rare that someone will tell you that, but if you get a lot of kind of middling feedback, sometimes that actually is it. And if you have, kind of a trusted advisor or someone you're particularly close to, it's not the, you might be well served to actually ask the question, is it a team thing? Can I bolster the team? People are usually unwilling to give that feedback. And then, kind of as you move through, usually the reasons for passing become much more specific. It's going to be, we think your churn rate is unsustainable. We got a pretty bad reference that we couldn't get over. All of these things, there's specific examples of companies where it's happened, kind of later in the process. And then this is, kind of an ideal scenario for us. The vast majority of them that don't look like this. So we're obviously very flexible, but an ideal scenario, you're a repeat entrepreneur who's kind of gone through the learnings of hiring and firing and setting up basic business processes and making strategic decisions. You've also, a key thing in that scenario is that not only did you do something before, but team members from your previous company have come with you. That's always a big indicator. They want to work with you again. They were excited about the experience. That's a strong signal. Also, particularly for where we're investing, it's also kind of low paid-in capital and taking a thoughtful approach to the fundraise that you've done previously. For us, an ideal Series A is somewhere between kind of 3 to 7 million. That number is increasing. We see very few Series A's that are $3 million these days. There's a tremendous number of seed rounds that are now $3 million. And that's fine. We're seeing a lot of kind of seed extensions, and when you kind of condense all the capital that's been raised before a Series A, more and more often the number's getting higher. There's also scenarios where it's semantic. So you'll raise a $2 million seed round, you'll raise a seed 2 or a seed extension, and ultimately you'll raise $5 million by the time you're coming to see us at Series A. To us, that's a Series B. So we're going to be really evaluating you on kind of what our Series B metrics are. So it may still say seed in the documents, but in reality, your expectations on valuation are often such that it's really more of a Series B, and that's how we'll evaluate it. All right, so getting ready to raise your Series A, these are just kind of some things to think about. First of all, is VC actually the right way to go? For the vast majority of businesses, it's not. Taking VC kind of changes the game. What was a successful outcome, that definition has changed, right? So, you have to seriously think about where you want to be in 5 years with the business before you decide that VC is actually the right way to go. It may be that you'd be happy kind of owning 80% of the business or owning 100% of the business and taking an opportunistic acquisition offer from a strategic who you have a partnership with at $15 million. That can be a great outcome for you. If you take a $5 million Series A, that is not a great outcome. So, the math changes, the expectation changes, and then of course you're taking dilution. So you need to believe that kind of taking that dilution is worth it, and that you're raising capital to accelerate growth and ultimately get to the next set of milestones, whether that's kind of profitability in some cases, and sometimes the next set of milestones is being able to raise a Series B and continue on. But it's not the right path for most businesses, and I feel like it's not discussed enough. In the media today, all you hear about are funding rounds, and that's what gets celebrated. But getting a financing done is just a means to an end. It's not. The work starts and the work continues after. It is not really something to celebrate, although it's very difficult to do, so I can understand it. That's not the goal. And then another thing, I see this a lot, and I see this partially because we always syndicate. So for us, that means in a Series A, there's always going to be another fund in a round with us. So I can see it sometimes when we're leading around, and this is a separate point. I'll go back to that. Hang on, sorry. On the fundraising point, it's extremely distracting. Fundraising, you're not going to get a lot done. And the trap that a lot of people will fall into is getting pushed into fundraising when they aren't really in fundraising mode. And I would just say kind of either be in fundraising mode and accept that, or don't be in fundraising mode. It's going to, if you're in between and you're taking meetings and you're doing follow-up, you're not really, you need to buy into the fact that what you are doing right then is fundraising, and that is what you're going to focus on, and you're going to be systematic about it. You're going to run a process, and you're going to try and lead it through to its completion. People end up getting stuck in a kind of continuous fundraising mode, which can just be extremely time-consuming, and it's just more and more time away from the business. And it's a pretty easy thing to do because you'll often get outreach, particularly if you're getting a lot of PR, to just be thoughtful about it and be honest with yourself about if you're in a place where you can and should be in fundraising mode. This is where I was going. So, the thing about fundraising from kind of the entrepreneur's perspective is what we do all day, every day is this, right? And for a lot of you, you might do this once. You might maybe do it 3 times, but you're not doing it day in, day out, every day. So I often see the signals, and this is where I was going on the syndication point. Let's say, if we're leading an A, and we'll often hear kind of from the entrepreneur whom we're backing, oh, this fund, and this fund are in. They're soft circled. That's a term. They're committed. They're excited. They just want to see an A. They want to see a lead, and so they are expecting to kind of email them, after they get a term sheet, and then that's it. The process is going to be over. Oftentimes, that's kind of a mismatch. So you need a healthy dose of optimism as an entrepreneur. But in the fundraising mode, you can often find that investors give mixed signals, or signals that you can't decipher. If this is really interesting, keep us posted. Sometimes that means it's really interesting, keep us posted, and sometimes it's pure option value. And being able to distinguish between those two things is pretty tough. So what I would say is it is a no until it is actually a yes. And that sounds silly, that sounds obvious, but I see time and time again, whether it's our entrepreneurs who are doing follow-on rounds, coming in and saying, you know, oh, we've got a bunch of interest. We have, you know, a bunch of great first meetings. Pretty sure this is going to be done in a week. And you know, the first meetings were good, but that's not what that means. You know, there's a lot more to it. So at the end of the day, what you are looking for is, you know, kind of people who really believe in what you're doing, and all you need to do is find one of those. And your time is often better spent kind of trying to find a believer than it is trying to convince a bunch of skeptics. So if you're finding that people, you know, that someone whom you're spending time is really stuck on the market, for example, you know, they're really stuck on the fact that they don't think the market's there, that they think the market's too small, or that it's too competitive. And you know, you're going to do the back and forth, and you're going to have a point of view, and you're going to refute that. But if that's the continuous dialogue, oftentimes they're not going to get over that. You know what their preconceived notion is, and your time is better spent in parallel finding someone who really believes. You know, because that's all you need is one of those, and then this entire process is a lot easier. Oftentimes, I'll even say that to people, you know, kind of during the process, is that, you know, I'm just really skeptical about, you know, XYZ thing, and I don't think I'm going to get over it. So I don't think your time is actually all that well spent kind of trying to convince me. All right, and then this is more kind of tactical. So these are, you know, there's a few other VCs in the crowd. You know, we see a ton of pitches, and these are the things that I see often that are, you know, can be problematic or are just things that you would rather not see, because, you know, in an ideal world, you'll have had kind of multiple interactions with an entrepreneur kind of before they're coming to you for funding. But that's not always the case. And so sometimes your first interaction and your first impression is going to be in that pitch. So that's why these things are actually kind of all that more important, because you're scoping out, you know, how does the entrepreneur, you know, respond to this question? You know, is he or she thoughtful about this particular element of the business? You know, do they believe that this is real? And you're kind of sanity checking some of the things that you believe against what they believe, and seeing if you can have kind of an intelligent dialogue about it, because that's going to be the precursor for your relationship over a long time. So oftentimes you'll see people being, you know, dismissive of competition. So no one else really offers what we do in the market. You'll see oftentimes, and of course you believe you have something differentiated, but that's almost never the case. You know, and maybe someone isn't doing exactly what you do, but that doesn't mean that the customer isn't going to bucket you in the same group of companies that's going after the same budget. You know, you need to think of it almost more holistically, like who's going after that mind share within an organization if it's a B2B business, or, you know, what else is kind of going to be, you know, delivering a particular consumer service, even though you might not think it's a direct competitor. It may be, you know, something else that's going after the same attention or the same share of wallet. So being thoughtful about competition rather than, you know, kind of dismissive. Market sizing. So everyone has, you know, it's usually slide 3 about how gigantic the market is. And that's fine, and that's something you need to think about, and you should be going into a big market in some way, shape, or form if you're trying to raise VC. But being a little bit more thoughtful around breaking that down into what segment of that market is your product really addressing, or particularly, or even just taking it back a little bit, what segment of the market is your product addressing at first? Right, so who is the customer that you're solving, you know, the biggest problem for at the beginning, you know, the most acute pain, and how big is that segment of the market? And then from there, you know, kind of what are your other opportunities? Because oftentimes you'll see it's $40 billion and growing 10% a year. And that's great, but that's rarely true. We tend to interrupt a lot. So the third point is really more kind of how pitches tend to be back and forth. Sometimes it is relevant and it makes a lot of sense. You want to control the flow of the meeting to say, actually, that's coming up later. But often it's not, and often you should address what you've gotten from them is a signal of what matters, right? What are they worried about? They just told you. And usually you want to address that. So if they jump immediately to customer acquisition cost on slide 4, address it. Don't wait till the end of the meeting. You kind of interrupt the flow of the conversation, and that thought is sticking in their minds as you say everything else. So it's usually in your best interest to just go with it, because you're learning a lot about how they're thinking about your business, and you're learning about potential investor fit. Because I haven't mentioned it, but obviously, it needs to be mutual. It needs to be on both sides. When the last slide is revenue or users or whatever your metric is, page views, uniques. If it was good, you'd have shown me early. That's kind of the rule of thumb. Like if it's going to blow me away, you're going to find a way to put it on slide 2. So I know that if I'm asking you early on, well, do you have customers? Do you have revenue? If it's a B2B business, or if it's commerce, I'll be asking you something else. If it's an app, I'll be asking you something else. I'll be asking you about engagement. I'll be asking you DAU, MAU. And if I have to ask, if you don't give me some sort of teaser, I know what the answer is, because you wouldn't hide something good, kind of on slide 14. And then finally, this one is often, so what are you raising? This is usually a conversation at the end. They'll ask, what are you raising? And kind of, where does that take you? And often I get a response it takes us 18 months. And that's fine. And that is the rule of thumb that people give you is, raise enough money to get you 12 to 18 months. But getting 18 months to where? Like the much more relevant thing and the thing that you should be thinking about is, what the white metric is what's the next milestone it's going to get you to? And is that, a certain revenue target? Is that a certain set of customers? Is that a partnership? Is that, a new product launch? Is that, what is it? And, is it going to be enough to get you to that next place? Because oftentimes the instinctual response is, it's 18 months. It all ends up being based on milestones more than it does anything else. So just being you should be almost backing into it. You should definitely be backing into it the other way, right? In order to get to this milestone, it's going to take us how long and how much. And then just kind of planning. So planning in advance. So it's easier than ever to find investors and to locate them, and people are pretty networked and out there in the community. But as I said, it's also pretty noisy, so it's really hard to break through. Some of this is specific and some of it's broad, but so leveraging your peers. So you're going to have a panel full of people here that are talking about this. So your kind of fellow entrepreneurs know what's going on in the market. They know if there's a fund that actually doesn't have any money. They know, if you should be spending time with this group or not, and why. So don't, Okay.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? We are conducting a test of the building's fire alarm system. Please disregard any alarms that you may hear and see. This is only a test. Once again, we are conducting a test of the building's fire alarm system. Please disregard any alarm.
So anyway, ask your fellow entrepreneurs. They know, they've just been through it. Also, these are more obvious, but take a look at sector fit. Is there, have they dabbled in the space? Do they talk about it publicly? Is it something that they're interested in? And finally, on the stage they invest. Oftentimes people are pretty upfront about that, but not always. So a lot of later stage funds will say they do, from Series A all the way through to growth, but in reality they've never done an early stage deal. And that is pure marketing and positioning. So look at where they actually invest. There's a lot of ways to find that, but take a look at what they've done in the last 6 months. Has it all been Series C or growth? Odds are you aren't the exception. odds are that that's not a good place to spend your time. And then I mentioned this before, but really think about kind of finding your best introduction in. Usually the very best ones are kind of an entrepreneur within the existing portfolio whom they think highly of. But there are many other ways in, but take time to think about it because it really is meaningful. Because it's just another filter on kind of the continuous inbox kind of overload. And then momentum is key. This is also fairly obvious that having positive momentum throughout the process is only going to help, and that the converse is true as well. Showing someone your financials and then massively missing your plan the next month as you're talking fundraising is going to be usually pretty problematic. But having kind of managing information flow on your side in order to kind of have positive updates and kind of keep people interested in what's going on is a really good skill of good fundraisers. Let's see. Okay, and then finally, here's a few places where we're spending a fair amount of time. This is really more kind of food for thought and FYI. Obviously mobile is gigantic. I don't know how everyone knows that, but there's a lot of positive stats here, and what we're particularly interested in is kind of apps and entrepreneurs who are kind of reinventing, have domain expertise in, and are reinventing kind of industries for whom a lot of kind of disruption and innovation hasn't really touched, right? So there's a lot of people now going into logistics, and that's interesting. There's people thinking about transportation, and instead of looking more kind of within those verticals, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. So we're spending time there, and then kind of rethinking physical consumer goods. So whether that's manufacturing, or the delivery of, or the shipment of, or the printing of. So that's both kind of direct to consumer, and it's also those enabling technologies and how things are being rethought. But those are obviously on the previous slide were two gigantic markets, but there's any number of subsectors that are still really interesting opportunities. And this is really more just things that we're thinking about. I think that's it. So I'm not, kind of take any questions or, anything that, yeah. It's almost always net. However, in something like that, usually, so in an audience-based business or in a marketplace, it's going to be a little different. It takes longer. So in an audience-based business, it's also not going to be revenue. In an audience-based business, you're typically building your base. So it's really going to be other metrics. In a marketplace or someone who's taking a cut of a transaction, it's going to be transaction volume, dynamics within the market, and really understanding, maybe they aren't charging at all right now. But do you think there's an opportunity to, and is the transaction volume increasing at such a rate that that could really be meaningful? Sometimes they don't charge early on. Yeah, it's fine. It's, no, it's not a red flag. But they also, usually companies will have communicated in some way to their users that there may, in fact, at some point, they might charge, which is usually better than springing it on people later, and they tend to fake that.
High investment strategies usually consistent throughout the fund, or different platforms bring on different products. So for example, if you invest in a different after you fall, would you bet much more strongly that you are in the same area that would be consistent if that lead platform had found your platform to a fund?
It does tend to, sure. So this was basically, is the fund strategy consistent across the fund, or is it partner dependent? I think that's what I'm hearing. It tends to be consistent across the fund. However, people are kind of drawn and end up kind of carving out areas that they spend more time and just build more expertise in. So yes, you should think carefully that if the only person who's done media deals left that firm, and they haven't replaced them with someone else who does a lot of media, then yes, you need to think about that.
You mentioned repeat founders, but what do you see for first-time entrepreneurs in terms of differentiating themselves for first-time founders? And also, you mentioned you guys oftentimes won't lead a deal. So in cases where you don't lead, how do you get the terms that you want?
Sure. So we do lead, and we often lead, but we don't always lead. We don't have to. But the other question that you asked was about first-time founders, and we back a lot of first-time founders. Typically they're differentiating themselves on a variety of factors. It's how they're thinking about the business, how they've executed to date, the people that they've managed to recruit. They've managed to get people to kind of join them on this journey. They've been able to sell their employees, which is huge and a big signal. And usually they are going to have something to show, right? Where we're investing. Right, there's a product out in market, there are customers. If it's B2B, they're paying, we can call and talk to them. And if it's consumer, there's also a lot of touch points. So and then of course we're all the other boxes, and we're gonna do references, and we're gonna look at the market and all of that. But no, I mean we back a ton of first-time founders. We do love to see some domain expertise. It's always great somewhere on the team. But we've done things where we haven't had that too. There are no hard and fast rules. Did I answer everything? No. So the question is, is there a time in the fund's life where you're necessarily putting out more dollars? And no, we have a pretty consistent kind of investment time horizon. It's we're actually usually investing over about 3.5 years. And there's going to be natural fluctuations. But we're not under pressure from LPs, say, to put out a certain amount of dollars over a certain period of time. But we're also not paid to time the market. So we're not paid to sit out for a year. So it is fairly consistent.
What value do you add besides incremental capital?
Sure. What value do we add? So everyone's going to have a different answer. Where we spend a lot of time is on the business development side, business development and sales. So we've got really deep networks across the firm in media, in retail, and with brands, with agencies. Right before here was actually at a demo day that we put on with 5 of our companies with the agency's access, which is part of Group M. So we spend a lot of time of getting our companies in front of people who can give them business, or in front of potential partners or potential distributors of their product. We also spend a lot of time on recruiting, helping out with recruiting, and then certainly, as everyone does, around kind of strategic initiatives and making introductions and thinking about where the company needs to go. We also are very involved as they raise follow-on rounds. Introducing them to investors and thinking about strategy.
Do you ever invest in businesses outside the U.S.?
We do. We have investments in the UK, in Ireland, in Hong Kong, in Berlin, and probably other places that I should remember that I just am not at this moment. We usually have a local partner or someone who's within the vicinity of local, in Europe. If it's European, we've got one in Estonia, for example. I was missing one. So we do.
When you said you're looking at how long you want to last in the company do you have a preference, or does it make a difference if they're looking to raise a Series A, or if they're looking at growing constantly?
No, it doesn't, depending on the rate of growth, right? Like if you're taking a Series A investment and you think that's going to get you to $5 million in revenue, and then you're going to grow 5% a year profitably, that's not a great fit for VC, right? That's just not going to usually be a big enough outcome for it to be meaningful. So know within bounds, if that is helpful. Sure. So sometimes they are. So it's also, so I was at Summit Partners for my first job, which I'll tell you is a later stage fund, but they are actually a feeder into the industry for kind of taking people out of undergrad or out of banks, and it's an outbound program. You'll see Summit alumni everywhere because they train you, and other people then have put a bunch of programs in that are similar. So you need to look at where they're coming from, and if it's a later stage fund that does not do early stage, do not spend any time. It's purely them not vetting you very well. Usually it's not nefarious, sometimes it is. But again, talk to your fellow entrepreneurs, because they're the ones who know, oh, that company spent 2 months with me and then invested in my competitor. And there are funds that have that reputation. So, you know, asking people about the reputation of those people is the best way to go. Anything else? Awesome, thank you guys.